Are we there?
We are. Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, joined today by Jolly Scholar, and very happy it is so. I'm very sorry for getting started late. It is entirely my fault, not my guests. We had some issues going back and forth with figuring out some details. However, we are here now, and thank you very much for joining us. The subject of our discussion this afternoon will be Burning Man and what lessons it may or may not hold for the right. It is certainly a successful cultural event that was ginned up from scratch many years ago, and it takes place yearly and is rather high profile, at least in quote-unquote cultural circles. So you could at least make the argument that there are things that the right wing can learn from this event and how it has developed over the years. My guest, Jolly Scholar, who is with us today, has been to the event many times, has studied it from an academic perspective, and has any number of interesting thoughts to share with us about it. I myself went long ago, I think in 1999 once, so I am not entirely unfamiliar with it. I realize that this topic may be controversial for some of you who might think of it as, just some sort of inane leftist pastime. But whatever it is, and however you might be against it, there's more going on with it, certainly, than that. Before we get started, let me go through the quick introductory stuff. Please do follow this channel, Semiagog, in a safer space. You can do that on BitChute. You can do it on YouTube. You can do it on Odyssey, which I highly recommend. Please do follow me. You can do it on Minds, on Gab, on Telegram, and on Twitter. For those who wish to support the channel, let me get over here so that I can show the mighty people who make that possible. There is GoFundMe, and there is Subscribestar. You can find that as an option. Hopefully I know how to share my own screen. These, ladies and gentlemen, are the people who make my channel possible. We have updated this list recently. I want to thank everyone who does support the channel so kindly. You can do that through GoFundMe and Subscribestar, as I said. All of the credit and none of the blame for these Praetorian Chads who make this possible. There we are. Pardon me. And the last thing is, please check out my books. They're available on Amazon. This is a Vinculum.
I've been reading that one. It's really good.
I thank you, Gerard. This is a dystopian tale set in Istanbul in, as I recall, the year 2076, where insane corporate hitmen and an esoteric sect of assassins and a book thief all cross paths. There's my collection of poems at Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. You can find that on Amazon as well. I want to say that a channel viewer, John Goris, just sent me this to my P.O. box. Apparently there is a new Ghost Tank episode coming. You can find him under John Goris or Ghost Tank. He says it's for Halloween 2021. Anyway, I rather like his artwork and his channel because way back when with St. Floyd, he sent me this lovely little piece of artwork here. Isn't that nice?
Very
St.
nice.
Floyd. Yes, so that from John Goris. Last thing, Gerard, please forgive me, but I should say for our viewers, I did talk to Tim Rudisil this last week, and he is still alive and breathing, which I'm very happy to say. He asked me to tell everyone, what was the phrase he used? He says he's dying and getting better at the same time. He wanted me to say that Lital should get in touch with him. And yeah, otherwise he's just, he's struggling through recovering from whatever this last thing is that hit him. So he gives his best regards to all. And he told me that with any luck, he should be back in a week or two. But we will see. Whatever it is that hit him, as I said, is a bear. So thank you for waiting. This was a slow opening. And apologies for all the introductory material. First off, I want to introduce our guest. This is Jolly Scholar. He has a channel of his own. I recommend it highly, particularly for just to my tastes, because there's more on there. But some of his recent considerations related to communism getting started in the United States and movements to do things like subvert the folk music traditions in the US. stuff going on in the Appalachians and rest, but there's far more over there. So Jolly Scholar 888, thank you for being with us today. How are you, sir?
Excellent.
Well, we have this wild and crazy discussion of Burning Man and what lessons it might offer the right. So maybe by way of getting started, you can first just, for people who have not seen one of our previous discussions, like the one we did on processions, can you maybe just give us a very quick introduction about who you are and how you know about Burning Man?
Yeah, I started off in another century as a classical guitarist major. Then in Santa Fe, New Mexico, decades later, I ended up with a master's in the Great Book series, which is basically a master's in philosophy. And then I put the two together at the University of Maryland for a PhD in ethnomusicology. And as you know, because we've been doing the flamenco world a lot, my whole thing centered around Spain. Flamenco was a big part of it, but it branched out into music and ritual in Andalusia. From music and ritual in Andalusia, I would go to these, I developed a model of how culture comes into being. And one of the things that I came across, I was in Heidelberg at a conference, and the lady right before me did her presentation. And it's the first time I ever heard of Burning Man. I mean, it's kind of funny, isn't it? I'm in Heidelberg, Germany. The first time I heard of Burning Man was from this lady, and Susan Pike. In fact, she's now a fairly well-known writer in the Burning Man field. At least she was at that time. I didn't know who she was. And so she did hers on the Burning Man temple. And that struck a real chord with me because from where I was going with the pilgrimage, the processional pilgrimage.
Lay brotherhoods in Catholicism and grassroots bottom up. The
bottom up, that the Catholic Church is way more bottom up than people understand. And that's what I really came to realize from going to this 200,000 sometimes people festival. And it's all music, it's all singing, it's all dancing. And of course, there's a lot of religious, heavy religion too.
And here you're talking about the Rocio in Spain.
Yeah. And there's the ecstatic experience becomes you get up close to it in a way that's very rare if in Western society, unless you really go look for it. And here it was just right in my face. They had a word for it called control chaos. And another one that another place is called sublime savagery. It resembles at times, you'll think this is funny, but a mosh pit in punk circles. And we can talk about that. What goes on around the Virgin when they bring her out in the middle of the night. And the mosh pit has got some similarities. It's very weird. So anyway, so I then said, I've got to go to Burning Man because the thing was the temple. That's what brought me. The temple arose. There was no blueprint to Burning Man, right? It was just people going out there burning this big effigy. Started about 1991 at Black Rock, a little bit earlier. I forget the name of the beach right now. It's escaping me. There was a beach on right out on San Francisco. And
Stinson Beach or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've probably got it in my notes here, but what the hell? So what I realized was that here's part of my model. Now, of course, one of the things that with the far right, the right, whatever, to me, it's the default position is to call us right wing. Okay, fine. But my main issue is, well, as we said earlier, that I'll get a lot of pushback, but freedom and creativity, right? How to create culture. How does culture emerge? And the best culture to me emerges with the most freedom to allow the individual to become, to explore, to become follow whatever destiny he thinks he has, to be able to formulate his own destiny and to pursue it, which includes failing, right? But you still have the most content and prosperous people when the most of them are pursuing their own destiny, a vision that they've made of their own destiny and the ability to pursue it.
Right. And I will jump in here. I've realized that this will be controversial for a number of people, but Gerard and I overlap to a considerable extent in this regard. I hear a lot very often about, atomizing individualism. And I agree that when it is brought down to the level of being merely really just a kind of rank undeveloped egocentrism that's a kind of acting out
right,
tantrums.
No, I'm really not talking about that.
That it is atomizing, and that it is a cultural corrosive, and that it is something that should never be encouraged. But one of the examples, I don't know if you've heard it, Gerard, but take a look, for example, at German military doctrine. Starting with the Prussians and, reaching its peak with World War I, and then the mid-century period. They trained their officers to operate with the greatest degree of autonomy and not to require all kinds of top-down input in order to adapt and deal with circumstances and confront them. So that's one example that I use of the kind of freedom and agency. Now, I realize the example I'm giving is not straight out of creativity, right? But it is. If you're an officer and you're forced to figure out how to grapple with this problem in a way that may not have come out of the textbook, then autonomy and creativity and the ability to, come up with a solution, that matters, and that applies in many different areas of life.
And it also matters that, for instance, I read Rommel's Attacks. Excellent little booklet. So let me just ask you a question. You're pinned down by machine gun fire. What do you do?
Well, I don't know. I was raised reading, Robert E. Howard. There's a famous scene where the Zuagirs attack Conan, and he's got his straight western broadsword, even though he's amidst the desert nomads. And as soon as the attack happens, the first thing that the bronzed western of its muscles is steel springs and whalebone. The first thing he says is "up the slopes and at them." That's how the story starts, which is immediately attack.
It's really what Alexander did, right? His soldiers thought he was crazy. He was going to charge uphill across the river, and they had just force marched. And he goes, "Yeah," because he said they're all dug in. They're all dug in because they're afraid of us. Here we are. We're out in the open, and there they are, fortified. We're going to go right up the center.
Right,
what's the answer to that? What does Rommel say? He said, attack. Totally counterintuitive, right?
Because you'll be pinned down and cut to pieces. And attacking may just kill all of you too, but at least you have a chance.
You got a chance. Right. So Rommel loved what he was doing because he loved his cause. So that's a big part of it.
And morale, yes.
If he didn't love his cause, he wouldn't have been a very good leader. He loved his cause, and so that's a big part of this.
Right, but let me, if I can, just finish this last little point. Is also that I prefer to use the term rather than a lot of people will call it individualism as this fracturing, corrosive, atomizing, egocentric thing. I like to throw in the notion of individuation, the idea for those who are capable of it. You're attempting to. I mean, everybody talks about hierarchy and aristocracy on the right, and they're like, how do you think you get that without individuation, without the idea that each one of you has to strive to become a more formidable player?
Of course, whatever the game is. Come from? They don't come from Mars. They come from the peasantry. The peasantry creates them. Why? Because they want to. They want to be excellent. They want to. And I totally see what you're saying about individuation versus individuality. And remember, to a lot of people, the greatest desire they have is to serve something better than them, something higher. It's not to be them. It's not really them. A goal of a person may be, I love this company and I want to be not even the vice president. I want to be I see myself as a manager in that company for the rest of my life. I love that company. Right? He's pursuing his own destiny as he sees it.
Right. Or I'm an NCO in the Army.
Make him go and do, no, you're going to work over here. No, you're going to work over there. Then it's not the same productivity and creativity. Again, it could be controversial, but I don't think it is. And part of it is to see that we have to look at some universals. And if you don't agree that there are any, then that's a real problem. When people gather together to create, let's just say, to pursue the ecstatic experience, there's a powerful bond. And you see that in all. Well, let's start with one basic premise that everybody may not agree with me. There's no such thing as a non-religious culture. They don't exist. They never have.
Okay, well then I certainly agree on that. And I think you're going to find a very warm reception to that notion, because what we've seen is sort of the disappearance of the vertical dimension. When you deal with something, for example, like a Marxist dialectics and, materialism, dialectical materialism, it really amounts to, I call it, the Edwin Abbott, the flatland country. It's just flat. Everything is flat. It's like you have the X and the Y axis, but you don't have a Z axis.
and everything is power.
Right.
So it brings resentment. Everything is a power struggle. They reduce us to a level of an animal. We're all struggling for power and position. This is what all animals do. It's called dominance and submission.
Right, but I would go further, because with the animal aspect, you have a hierarchy. I mean, I get your point. This is a little bit of quibbling, but literally with animals, like we've talked about many times. I mean, you came with me to Stockholm for that conference. I mean, and we've talked about the Marx stuff a million times. But animals have a vertical dimension. They piss on a tree. You know, and the taller the animal, the higher the urine can literally hit the stream. And that's why dogs will come along and sniff to figure out how tall the other dog is. They actually have a vertical dimension. I mean, as I've told you in the past, you have pandas that turn upside down in order to like piss higher, to fake other animals out, to make them think that they're bigger. And remember that what happens is you can say that it's all animal and that it's all about.
Communism does that.
Right, but remember that
is a little bit.
They have a game of trying to have a power at the top, and so in reality there is a z-axis, but it just has the inner party or dictator up at the very top, or the oligarchs that run it. But for everyone else, they seek to flatten, which is why they always talk about egalitarian and leveling society where we're all equal. So the point is. That historical, or historical, that vertical dimension is the sacred. So I'm talking about like Mircea Eliade and the idea of an axis mundi, the idea of a center post.
Cosmological, and this is what's so what's counterintuitive in this process of touching the ecstatic experience, where the most important relationship. There's the self to the self to the community, the self to the operational environment, the particular environment that your community is in. And then there's the self to the cosmological, which is something that nobody experiences. And so you would wonder, why is it that humans, the most important relationship is not the bottom three? It's the self and the community to the cosmological. It's very mysterious. It's very odd why humans do this, but we do. And it's the most important thing to any human community, so that they will sacrifice almost anything in that endeavor to maintain that cosmological connection.
Okay,
it comes from the inside the body. People do this themselves spontaneously,
and you could say instinctually. Yes. But I know where you're coming from. But just to be super clear for the rest of our folks, he was just talking about how he's into, for example, looking at religious processions and grassroots bottom-up movements in the Catholic Church, running things like lay brotherhoods. So you can see how what he's talking about, the idea of how spontaneously generated community rituals and experiences that bring them together through this connection to what you're calling the cosmological, that brought you to Burning Man as well. But before you go on to your next point, can you just clarify what you mean when you talk about the cosmological?
The ecstatic experience, whether it's delusional or not, like Mircea Eliade, I'm glad you brought him up. He says we should be called homo religiosus. I would suggest you could also call us homo delusionalis, delusional. Yeah. I'm not here to argue that that when a person has these ecstatic experiences, whatever, that they feel that they have communicated with the divine, with the totality, and therefore they know their place in the totality. They know the relation.
Great chain of being, right?
It could be a total delusion, right? Where just humans operate with this incredible delusion. I'm not going to argue that right now. I'm only going to argue about the results. The results, it generates culture.
Right. And likewise, you're not going to say it's not true. You're just saying that it's entirely irrelevant. You just are going to look at the phenomena that emerge from this observable fact.
See, and the Marxists have taken this out of the picture because of their obsession that they want you to think like an animal, only about power relations. And therefore, they can't generate culture because ideologies cannot create culture. Therefore, all socialist states implode within a generation and a half, unless they move on to fascism, because the fascists will incorporate state religion, state ethnicity, and in this era, state capitalism. So that's what China is. China is a fascist state. And I've been looking at them a lot lately with a lot of their entertainment of this. I'm beginning to appreciate where they're coming from, in the sense that they're more formidable than we even think. There's something going on there that we better be aware of. So anyway, so this cosmological drives every single society. There's no society without it. And then I would argue this could be too in the granular here. When you try to express the unexpressible, you have to struggle. And that struggle to express is one of the main features that has been driving the arts and sciences. And if you look at science fiction and science, humans want to understand the cosmos. Why in the hell do we give a rat's ass what's going on in a black hole some 500 light years away? I mean, it's crazy, but we do. We're fascinated and we're driven. And you know how string theory came about, right? Do you?
If I do, I can't.
It's a musical. It's interesting because it ties us back to the old cosmology of the ohm and the. Okay, so the small, as Nietzsche would put it, the small with the microcosmic, subatomic particle. Oh my God, what?
Particle physics, quantum physics.
Quantum, thank you. Quantum physics and quantum mathematics work beautifully. It predicts, it works. And then relativity.
Oh yeah, you're talking. Yeah, but there's a big gap between the two, which is why everybody's looking for a grand unified theory. Yeah.
Well, the unified theory would be
grand unified theory would be something that would bring them all together and make sense of these seemingly
right. He was going for the macro more. That's Einstein's unified, and he couldn't find it.
No, but everyone else has been looking for it since, and that's why Einstein was saying God does not throw dice or whatever, because he was rejecting the quantum findings.
Okay.
Anyway, but get to the point of
the mathematics of relativity, the large scale universe, and the mathematics of the micro contradicted each other. And this drove mathematicians crazy. They said, this cannot be. And so they struggled, and that's what string theory reconciles the mathematics of both.
Right, because they're looking for a grand unified theory. They call it good. Yeah. So, but to come back around to this notion of how why they're looking off into the distance, you were going to tie this to the idea of a bottom-up culture, the instinctive or spontaneous vertical dimension.
To commune directly with the divine, with the
what you're calling
as a whole.
Right. And again, you're looking at the results for people, for culture. I think you could almost say that you're looking even evolutionarily.
Yes.
From an anthropological.
I've done that. I'm doing that series of music and humanity. And in there, there is beginnings of a model of a feedback system between music, ecstatic experience, and the actual how the brain evolved, which would be too complicated to get involved here. But just so you know, there's just like biogenetic structuralism is a model that's very interestingly, if you study Kabbalism with the overflowing cups on the tree, biogenetic structuralism is an organic model for how that actually happens.
You can find similar kind of ideas. A lot of that ends up being Neoplatonic, actually, and you can find parallel stuff to parallels for what you find in Kabbalism and some of the esoteric Shiism. But anyway, let's come back around. I mean, It's
not the Jewish Kabbalism.
It's post Pico della Mirandola, where you get the synthesis, you get the heavy syncretism of Pico and Pico della Mirandola. Anyway, we had to go off on this excursus a bit to give everybody context, but hopefully the viewer can now understand how and why you would be interested in grassroots phenomena over here with Catholic processions and lay brotherhoods, because it's not a top-down imposition of the princes of the church.
No.
And likewise, you can see the parallels with what you're studying to the concerns about communism and genuine Western culture, the one that develops necessarily within this evolutionary framework, the other one being a utopian psychopathy that attempts continuously to impose from above things that really can never last. The minute that the imposing force, I've heard you say this many times, that the power class applies in communist societies, the minute that imposing force is removed, almost instantly these things begin to unravel and disappear because they've been artificial the entire time.
The church, the Orthodox Church in Russia, is completely there, even after a generation or two of trying to completely indoctrinate them and stifle it out. It's as though nothing had ever happened.
Right.
It's back as strong as it ever was.
Oh, well, but there is an interesting church that I saw on, maybe it was one of Owen's Foundation's podcasts, or maybe it was on Academic Agents channel. I think Pharaoh was talking about it. But there is one interesting church there in Russia that I saw that is an Orthodox church. And it very interestingly puts together the idea of the state religion with orthodoxy in
every,
ways that
every church tried to do,
and they all through history,
also,
and that's why people were there were coronations in the church. I get it. I'm just saying that architecturally,
fascism. The only way it could have survived had it become fascistic, like China. China could survive for a long time because it's fascist. They have an ethnicity, which is the Han. Don't kid yourself. The reason they're after the Uyghurs is not just the religion that they call a disease. And of course, I would not call that religion a disease, mind you. I wouldn't say that. But the real reason is not just the religion. It's because they are different. And this has gone back centuries. The Uyghurs are not Han. That's the real half the problem right there. The Han, they have several Christianity, Taoism, Buddhism are state sponsored. The officials make sure that whoever is they did an arrangement with
they switch out the head of whatever it is with someone who's their person.
Who's the head. So they have endorsed several religions. They have it's the Han. It is the Han. It's
right now, but let's. I don't want to get too far.
Capitalism.
Right. So but the important thing for everybody to get, because now we're getting over to Burning Man proper and the lessons we can learn from it and the things you see in it and that you want to share. And maybe we can imagine, would there be any value in a right-wing version of it? And if there was, what would it look like? Because it's got a very different set of predicates in some respects, right? Leaving aside the fundamental aspects of how culture develops and the religious experience that you're talking about. We're getting now over to Burning Man. Burning Man is something that interests you, I would guess, because you have the idea of people coming together for intense experiences of some kind, now recognizing in some cases that they're drug facilitated, in some cases they're trance ecstatic. Right? Yes, in history, quite often. Yes.
It's the rule, not the exception.
Well, all right. Are you going to tell me? Are you going to tell me that the taking of drugs was central to the Catholic experience?
Early Christianity, absolutely.
I'm not talking about early Christianity. I'm talking about centuries in Europe. So you can't say always is. I mean, you could say that you're smelling frankincense and myrrh in the church and you're chanting, and with the experience of the Mass, which you've studied closely, were they all taking peyote in the 15th century or 13th century?
I would say that if you look at, they're like Hildegard von Bingen.
Those are very rare individual mystics. I am talking about.
No, not the average person. The mystics
my point.
Drive the religion.
Right. But then let's clarify this for the viewer, because we're not saying that centuries of Catholic
religion and keep it moving forward almost inevitably.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that maybe Hildegard von Bingen. I don't think Teresa of Avila was smoking weed. I don't think St. John of the Cross was smoking weed. They had other things. Like what? Like melancholy and solitude.
I would say there's a very good chance. But all right.
Okay, but anyway, you're not saying that the lay people who are moved by the experience of the Mass daily.
That depends on the culture. There are certain cultures that they will, but the ecstatic experience communally is something we don't do so much, except like I said, in Spain they do. We tend to have the individual always going into the forest. And if you look at Indonesian, those ecstatic dances that they will do and they'll chant and they'll do it, it's a large. The monkey dance. Yeah, the monkey dance.
Monkey dance. Yeah.
So what happened is that the Burning Man people just started off about 15 people, right, doing this crazy little thing. And by the way, we can, if we want to, trace it back to the Cacophony Club, the Suicide Club, and all that, because these are the late B people. But whatever. It's Larry. I get this guy's name all the time. Anyways, I'll get there in a second. So, but they were just messing around. And as this thing became more and more intense, they had to move it out to this desert.
Early Burning Man events.
Early Burning Man. It was 15 or 20 people. They said they wanted a canvas to we're just going to go be whatever, we're going to just pursue the experience. And the early Burning Man was very, very violent, almost violent. People got killed by accident. They would drive, backwards at incredible,
later, well, I mean, I guess 99. I mean, somebody got killed there, I believe, when I was there in 99. I mean, you got like somebody just gacked out on, you get
somebody that jumps into the flames. Yes.
Right.
But no, this was they're driving backwards in the middle of the night or at 900, because there's nothing. It's flat and there's nothing. And they were shooting propane tanks. They would do crazy thing with, there's one that they almost see the guy catching fire. He's on kind of a rope with one of those, you're hanging and you're sliding across a large space.
Right.
And while things were going on fire, it almost caught up with him. So it got wilder and wilder, and finally they had to start curbing it. But the main thing is they had no idea what they were doing. And the temple was not a plot. There was no blueprint.
Well, the temple didn't even appear until like 98, 99, 2000, right in there. Well, you go on talking, and I'll find out when it first
that. It was after David Best, a friend of his, died in a motorcycle accident, which I had heard rumored happened because it was at Burning Man. He was playing chicken with somebody, but whatever.
It says Burning Man Temple, appearance of Burning Man Temple, David Best and Jack Hay brought their Temple of the Mines to the Playa in 2000, a structure that would become the first of a long line of temples. So I said 99. It was actually 2000.
That's when the incident happened. The guy had died in 99.
Right.
So that came later. And everything that's happened, the rules and everything that have come, like the 10 Burning Man principles, they all evolved as Burning Man progressed. This is the same with the Rocio. All kinds of elements and unspoken rules have arisen out of the Rocio that were not there in the beginning. Now the Rocio's, 200 years old, and Burning Man is only 35 or going over probably 38 now. But But this Nietzsche principle that I look at is called Into the Forest, right? His Dionysian procession. The ecstatic procession where you go to encounter what he calls the paradox that lies at the heart of existence. And then when you rhapsody about it, because when you encounter this experience with the divine, it makes you ill. It's not just, it's awesome and awful. There's Sturm und Drang, there's the trembling of...
Well, actually, there's a great, if anybody wants to look into the tradition of trying to ascribe these various qualities to the divine, or the experience of the divine, because how do you distinguish them, right? I mean, at least subjectively. There is Rudolf Otto's The Idea of the Holy, and so you got Mysterium Tremendum and the awesomeness of it and the rest. And really you see that reflected quite a bit in the tradition of the divine names, which comes out of, Semitic traditions. You've got it with the Jews. You've got it certainly with the
people are shaking. People go into this and they're convulsing. And they don't always come out, oh, it's wonderful, it's awesome, but it's
They might come out a little bit like,
reality is horrifying. And so then you have to, what Nietzsche calls, rhapsodize it and start, okay, and then you start making music and art to kind of poetically channel it. So I love Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy in the Spirit of Music. And of course, music is the fundamental art of the Dionysian impulse. So therefore, this Dionysian impulse starts. They began to slowly evolve. And one of the main things that, if you could take away about Burning Man, that's one of the most impressive things about Burning Man is the self-organization.
Well, do you know, just a very quick question, because you mentioned these 10 rules.
Yeah.
Were they around from the beginning? Were they like some kind of mission statement?
What I'm saying. They evolved as...
This is yet another example of one of the evolutions of the self-organization.
Exactly.
Right, well, let me know, because I've got
that too. The Rocio did that. There were things now in the Rocio that weren't there before, and they actually overlap in a weird way. Like everyone's a participant, no observers, full participation. That's also a standard thing about the Rocio that they will tell you. When you come here, you participate. You're not a spectator.
Right.
And I was told that, and I was a drum was put in my lap, and I said, okay, you learn to play the Sevillanas beat. You participate here. Next time you come, you better learn how to dance. You better know how to dance.
And look at just the so-called audience in any flamenco juerga, which you taught me about. This is the main set of instruments that everybody has with them. You play your hands, right? And you need to know the rhythm, or you got your jaleos, which are not just people vaguely shouting out of somewhere.
No,
they have to be absolutely precise. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is fundamentally, and this is something I only came to understand in conversation with you, and I won't go into it in detail because we have, they're fundamentally your ideas, and I know you're going to be doing a clip on them here within at most the next year, but you'll know what I'm talking about. We talked about the idea of the audience, the idea of an audience at all. And actually, it's a good point to bring this up, is something very Western that is the result of attempting to take the central experience that's happening and, put a box around it and charge people to come in and see it. Now, there are different ways that can happen, and as I said, I'm not going to get into all your details.
All high civilizations do that, but it always stems from when people did not do that.
Right. And once upon a time, there was no such thing as an audience.
Exactly.
It's not a black and white distinction between those who do it and those passive jerk-offs who sort of watch it like cucks, who can't be a part of whatever it is that's being done on the stage. Actually, that's a great way to talk about the spectacle society we have now, and the way a passive audience sits there like cucks and watches the people on the stage actually undergo the experience of interaction with the music and all the rest. So it's more like, instead of black and white of performer and audience, once upon a time we had a continuum.
Yes.
And that was almost like where you could hear the center of the sound, where the music was being produced at the center, and those who were closest would be most like the ones who were at the center. Yes. In terms of their ability to call or chant or dance. And the rest of the people
waited late at night. And the lesser performers got their chance earlier in the evening.
Right. Everybody, that's like opening act versus, headline act.
They would just do that naturally.
Or nosebleed seats versus the ones that are front row, in the sense of who gets closest and participates.
Right, but they're spectators. Yeah.
But that's a hierarchy too, because remember in the ancient Greek world, you had marked seats for the most important people in the Greek polis, who would be sitting right next to the performance,
Right.
And the idea of the chorus and the rest. But anyway, I've gone too far afield. I wanted to tap that because this is a part of what you're talking about in terms of the collective and individual experiences of the ecstatic, that on this blank canvas of the Black Rock Desert, at least in theory,
everyone contributes. Everyone has something to do. Everyone brings their own art, however bad. If you go at the center camp and you listen to all the musicians, all the people get up there and do their musical acts, most of them are awful, but they're still, they're fun.
But I will tell you, there are some very high quality art pieces that appear there. There's a lot of dumb and bad stuff.
That's what they're the best at.
Right. That's
beautiful.
And I also want to add for our audience that we're not saying necessarily, your whole point is, if I understand you correctly, your whole point is they don't even necessarily have to understand consciously any of these things that we're talking about. The whole point is that the very nature of our instinctive push to generate culture through these experiences would give rise to it, whether they're idiots or not.
At the Rocio, right, I was being the anthropologist. I had my notebooks. And I remember I sat down with one of the ladies of this, in my hermandad, the one that I traveled with, and they had their own carreta, which was a kind of what we would call a camper made especially for the Rocio, pulled by tractors. And they had kitchens and everything.
But they're really kind of two carretas, though. One is like an RV, but one is literally the cart, like a little chariot that carries the image of the Virgin, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, they used to say were, but they're not the same thing at all. Right. The carreta of the Virgin is not at all the same thing. These carretas are living, like I say, more like campers. And they're made just for the Rocio. They have front porches and people sit all dressed,
Well, go ahead and tell this story.
So here's what they go.
But hang on. While you're telling this story, I'm going to go and get myself a cigarette because I'm forced to watch you smoke that delicious cigar. So I can hear you as you say it, but I'll be listening, but I'll be back in just a moment because I have to get myself.
I have to do the same to you later for espresso.
All right. The floor is yours, though.
All right. So I'm sitting there. The lady took me to several, these are like houses of different brotherhoods. And because they say brotherhood, it includes women. Women have high positions. It's just an old word, right? Hermandad. Hermanos is brothers. So some fascinating things happen at these gatherings. And I was sitting down with her and I had my little notebook out and I'm saying to her, blah, 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 ask her a question. Then I say, well, what does Rocio, in a sense I said, what does it mean? What is it? And she just looked at me and rolled her eyes and she goes, don't ask that. Do. Okay, just put that notebook away. Now, this was an average person. This was not, she was not an academic or an anthropologist or claimed to be a spokesperson for the Rocio. Is that this is common knowledge in the Rocio. You don't ask what it means. It means what you're doing. When you do it, you'll know what it means. Otherwise, it's a stupid question. And this is very similar to if you go to Burning Man to ask what it means. I mean, it's crazy, right? I can tell you another interesting story while they're getting his cigarette. So this is a Burning Man story. There was a guy who I watched this little documentary about 4 or 5 people. One guy went to Burning Man. His artwork kind of didn't work. I mean, it all fell apart. You know, that was, you go out there, you have an idea, but you could fall flat on your face. So this other fellow was a teacher in a middle-class neighborhood, and he had a backyard, and he was building something like a saucer or something for Burning Man. And the kids would come around because he was a teacher as well, you know, as a neighborhood guy. And the kids would go, you know, Mr. So-and-so, yeah, what are you doing? And they just, oh, I'm making this and this and that. And the people would go like, everyone would ask him, well, what for? And he had a very good answer, because most of us have done this. He says, well, when you were a kid and you saw this tree and you climbed it, why did you do that? And I remember doing that. I would scare the hell out of my parents. I had no idea why I did it. It was just an instinct. I said, I could see myself grabbing the parts, and I wanted to go up there and see what it was like. So I just did it. And so he said, that's why I'm doing this. Don't ask why, just experience. Go there and do. Be a participant, and it'll make sense to you. As an observer, you know.
Right. And you could also say the rational mind itself, in an attempt to objectify the subjective through this game of creating the observer within oneself, they almost become the cucks of their own experience, watching it happen, attempting to rationalize it instead of directly experiencing it in the fashion you're talking about.
Well, the Marxist obsession and exploitation of language is its own utter defeat, right? We discourse reality. What do these idiots think? We don't construct reality through discourse or otherwise. Reality constructs us. And the only way you'll know that is by experience. And this Nietzsche was very careful about that. He said, do not confuse language with music. They're not the same thing. Yet I read this idiot Nautier, Jean-Jacques Nautier, and he had this thing of discourse and music, and you just want to strangle him. You know, obviously he wasn't a musician. Well, he claimed to be. Once you put the discourse, talking about music is what creates the appreciation of the music, or how people experience music. You're off. Forget it. You don't understand music. You should just stay out of it.
Yeah, and you were familiar with this because you saw me struggle with my little rodent wheel rational mind, where I want to talk and speak, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to explain it. Let me explain it myself. I'm going to explain it to you, blah, 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 blah. And there was that night when Jesus Montoya, may he rest in peace, was there with, what's his name? Was it Lito? The one from the Arles, the Southern French tradition. So Jesus was there from the Spanish tradition. Lito was there from the French gypsy tradition, and the two of them kind of had a little bit of that.
Actually Spanish, right? Because
right, of course. Yeah. That's Manitas de Plata and that.
The room was brought in by Jose Reyes and his
but to keep it in focus, because we'll just whine terribly, much of it being my fault. I was sitting there, to your point about the rational mind and the experience of music. You know, I've been trying to figure out the compas and all the rest. And I discovered, because I didn't get the compas at that point, but they're just going, right? But the palmas I was doing was, you know, some kind of easy tangos 4/4 count, you know.
You got good at palmas, you did.
But well, not compared to a real flamenco. But anyway, so I'm sitting there and I'm feeling it going, and they're singing, and the guitarists are playing, and they're you know, spontaneously doing their little improvisational stuff, and then boom, they stopped, and I stopped, and everything stopped, and it was done. Like I stopped in exactly the right spot. And you know quite well that the exact spot means not half a clap more, like right. Stop. And everyone just stops instantly. And it's not like it's on a score.
No, it's not on a score. You just know where the stops happen.
And it was only because my mind had turned off and I allowed that rational aspect of my thought to get the fuck out of the room.
You could feel that's where it was going.
It was even more than that. I simply stopped when everyone else stopped, because that's when you stop. And there was no rational process involved in it. And I bring that up because I think it echoes what you're talking about. When you say, don't ask what the Rocio is, right? Or the people who want to overly rationalize the experience of music from the outside, you know, like the two old men in the Muppets who are looking down going, well, we're the two old men in the Muppets talking this evening, you know? Right. But the idea is that,
what does it mean?
And so they become cucks of their own experience. I really like this metaphor now, because there is a direct personal experience of the religious, of the divine, of music, things that, as a matter of fact, you're saying are deeply related. by trying to step back with the rational mind to do this objectification, another manifestation of our whiteness, they in fact kind of throw a monkey wrench into the direct experience.
Right.
And that direct experience was what you were going to places like Rocio and Burning Man to discover. So I've been talking too much. Please bring us back to what you learned.
Playing his piano, and George Sand is laying underneath it, which right there is kind of suggestive. She's laying under the piano and he's playing it. And he plays one of his sonatas.
I'm sorry, would you say Chopin?
Chopin, yeah.
And you're talking about George Sand, the writer, the woman? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, they had a big love affair. His last one, as a matter of fact, he died. She's laying underneath the piano, and he's playing it. And he finishes it out. She goes, "What is it? What does it mean?" Of course, she's ecstatically in it, and he just turned the page back and started playing it again.
Right, that is the answer, and that's also an interesting thing because, like, I remember as a kid lying on my mother's chest as a small kid, and she was talking on the phone with someone, and there was a certain resonance to her voice. And you get that. I'm sure she was getting it to a certain extent by being under the piano where the strings are being hammered and she's trapped beneath the bottom.
Oh, yeah, she's feeling it. That's why she was there.
And there is the thing, too, that you don't get with recorded music that you only get with live music.
Yeah.
If I'd come up on a group of musicians out in the woods who are playing, because, it's like, banjo music, after the religious parts of a revival or as a part of the religious parts of the revival, or drum circles that didn't suck, right? You'll come up on the sound, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but there's a point at which it sounds very faint, and it's all very faint because it's not amplified and it's in the woods or whatever, and you get up close to it around the fire or wherever it is where they're playing, or up on the porch in the evening where they're playing, and suddenly when you're right up in it, it's almost louder than amplified music because you're in it. And that's very much that feeling of George Sand under the piano, or me lying on my mother's chest getting the direct vibrations of it. And that sort of speaks of the immediacy too. It's almost like the amplification gets in the way. But back to your...
Well, it leads to a good point. See, here's a weakness that I see at Burning Man. El Rocio generated its own music that became popular music. These cultural things generate culture that goes back into the rest of society. They affect society profoundly, even though it's a relatively small proportion, perhaps, of the total society. Andalusian society was immensely impacted by El Rocio. And so the Sevillanas Rocieras, if you now listen to Sevillanas anywhere you go, the chances are it's a Rocio Sevillanas. I didn't know that when I was listening to Sevillanas, because you have to know the coded terms and what they're singing about.
And you have to be able to audibly distinguish some of the features. Like I sat there.
There's one obvious feature. It's when you first come into the, once you know Sevillanas, it's obvious.
Sorry, Sevillanas, for our viewers, just tell them what it is very quickly.
Oh, yes, Sevillanas is a form. It's a form from the town of Sevilla. So it's like the blues, right? That's why you say it in plural. There's not a Sevillana. It's a
like we'll say Delta blues, right?
It's a form, right? Like the blues is a form, 12-bar blues. So the form is called the Sevillanas. There's a dance that goes with it. There's so many coplas. It's very structured. Right. And then the Sevillanas Rocieras stretched it out to devotionally and did a few minor changes. And then the words are almost all either directly devotional or they're simply singing about the Rocio itself.
And the Rocio itself is a pilgrimage. And I point people to my discussion with you earlier about processions, because the Rocieras Sevillanas is one that has been modified in some ways to work beautifully with processions as like a cadence for the people who are moving.
Oh, well, now the Sevillanas, where they altered the Sevillanas, they don't dance in procession, they stop. And then they all start dancing.
Right, but they sing them while they're moving, don't they?
They sing them while they're moving, absolutely.
Right, so it's been modified to work as a dance in a static position, but also to work while moving.
Where the Sevillanas Rocieras got modified was what I call sub-rituals. Late at night, with the Virgin, an image of the Virgin, intimately singing devotionally to her. They started to stretch them out. And this is what I call natural composition. We saw that in the fandangos that happened. That's another form that got stretched out to the point that when it got so deep, it lost all its rhythm. The Sevillanas Rociera is midway. You dance very slow to it, or you just sing it devotional. And then it almost reached the point of a saeta, which is that heavy,
deeply,
form.
deeply emotional and often sin
And no rhythm at
compás.
all. Exactly.
Right.
No rhythm.
Sin compás, no rhythm.
The opposite direction, from rhythmic to non-rhythmic, and to a medium where it was mediumly slow. So what we see at Burning Man, unfortunately, is that maybe it's too young, but it doesn't have a music of its own. I'm surprised by that.
And the music was kind of crappy.
Well, yeah.
I mean, you got people out there with damn glow. I mean, I was there. You have people with glow sticks. And
I'm talking about the performers were not crappy. Now, if you go out to where, then it's EDM. And the problem with EDM is that there's one guy or two people up in this box,
right,
musicating everybody else.
Yes, musicating.
And if somebody pulls a plug, these people don't know, they couldn't do anything.
Right. And I've often talked about this business of rhythms. You know, you look at the types of rhythms that a culture can grasp. You know, in the West, we've got 4/4, you know, or we'll have a measure of 8.
March,
right?
or waltz.
Right. It's going to be 3 or 2. Right. Whereas like in the Balkans, they will take the 3 and the 2 and combine them to make an odd rhythm, like a 9 or a 5.
They'll do it linearly. Right. And in Africa, they'll put them on top of each other, which is a whole different subject.
Right. Now, what I want to do,
induction.
And what I want to do here for our viewers who are kind of probably going, what the hell does this have to do with Burning Man? And what the hell does this have to do with the right? And what the hell does this have to do with me? Hopefully, at this point, some of you will have recognized something that I'm remiss. I should have stated explicitly at the beginning. What are we dealing with here in the West at this moment? We are dealing with a situation where our cultures, plural, cultures, have been systematically degraded by the likes of Trotsky and his type, right?
Frankfurt School bastards.
Yeah, Frankfurt School gang, all the rest of them, they deconstruct. They wish to destroy. Their idea is to blow it up, to burn Notre Dame, whatever it is.
The biggest rat is Ignatieff, Noel Ignatieff, a Jewish fellow that he's the whole anti-whiteness thing. That's his baby. Fucking vicious. The abolition of whiteness.
But allow me to throw this in because this is why it matters. We're talking about ways. See, the first thing is that what you're saying. So what you're saying is this develops spontaneously through genuine religious experience, and as you pointed out, it filters out into the society and it generates culture.
Exactly.
And so, if we are in a situation where ours has been dismembered in many respects. And you have the one thing like you see online with the Twitter folks going on about trad thoughts or whatever, and they're like, it's just a ridiculous pastiche. It's a set of affectations trying to return to something that we cannot return to, right? If you're confronted with that problem, that idea of I have a blank canvas because these damn commies have leveled everything, then you come with a message of hope, which is, don't worry about it. It spontaneously generates. If it is not top-down imposed, if it is allowed to spontaneously be generated through the natural evolutionary mechanisms, among which music figures prominently, right?
The ecstatic experience, that's the big thing. You have cultivated and this is, America has been punctuated by what they call these great awakenings, which is movements of intense spiritual experiences. And that led to all the social changes, like the Civil War, abolition, all of these changes. And then it got railroaded, and I'll be doing that in my next. By the time you get to the 60s, now we have wokeness rather than awakening. And one of the things that I would point out that we may hate, listen, Burning Man is hated by the left too. They despise it. They just have to be careful because it's so popular in the Silicon hip cool people.
Right. Huge numbers of people from
if you go to the internet underneath and start asking about Burning Man, and side chats and stuff, they hate it. It's bourgeoisie white people, and fine. But nonetheless, what the interesting thing that happened in the 60s was that the political 60s went its own way, and those crazy, stupid hippies went their own way, underground. They've been there the whole time. Here's an experience that I thought was very enlightening to me. I was at a place called Rootwire, and that was it's not a Burning Man regional. It's not a Burning Man or a Burning Man regional. And we talk about the proliferation of Burning Man is very interesting.
Hang on. You're going to tell us this tale, but let me just address one thing. We got this question saying, so how the hell is all this relevant to the right? That's what I was just attempting to explain. So let me, but let me just say it one more time, because I didn't get it out well enough. If we are in a situation where the commies have leveled everything, or, commies, fill in the blank, your preferred term for them, right? Where they have systematically and over time, I happen to think it's a heterogeneous group, but with some figures being prominent, some groups being prominent. The point is that if everything has been destroyed, and you're looking at, like, do we become like fake people from 100 years ago to attempt to recapture something we can't recapture? Right. Look back to one of my strategy sessions where I was talking to Apostolic Majesty. I'm just going to start calling him the historian, because that's a sign of my respect for his knowledge of history and his attempts to assemble it as a whole. We did a discussion looking at attempts in the past to go back and recreate things and the degree of success they did or didn't have. We're in a situation, to answer your question of how this is relevant to the right, we can say, oh, we're just going to reimpose these things from the past. Ultimately, you have the risk then of playing the same top-down imposition game that the communists and others play, which is the idea that we can just legislate it or mandate it from above, and it will be the generation of culture. And the whole point of what we're talking about here is that it doesn't work, that there is an evolutionary mechanism through, to gloss your hypothesis, through neurobiology.
The ecstatic experience. You can say the varieties of religious experience, the varieties of the ecstatic experience.
They will generate individual and group experiences that then filter out and get encoded in culture. So take a look at what we were talking about with the idea of the Rocio. Some places you dance it in a group, it becomes a festive celebratory thing that knits communities together and becomes a part of their festival calendar.
And structure. You go away from society to do it. You go
right,
away.
And we'll see that we're about to see that reflected in Burning Man, certainly. Right.
That's what it was, to the forest.
But also, to reference our previous discussion on processions, those have a military aspect. And you got like the orange and the greens in Northern Ireland.
Especially, yeah.
Right. They have a parade, a procession, which is like a group marching, but they do it to a type of music and they have an experience. And then it gets locked into territory. And it often follows pilgrimages routes, like down to Compostela, or it can be the patrolling of a border, which has to do with nations and defensive territory and the idea of an identity.
The virgins, its territory is a big part of it.
Right. So
Muslims.
So I want to hand it back to you. I'm sorry to cut in there, but if anybody's asking how it applies to the right from this point forward, hopefully it's explained. If you don't get it, come back and perhaps think about it some more, because I believe it is. It
could be relevant. We have to see, but like you say, our culture is exactly what's being eaten from the inside. They figured they couldn't destroy us militarily. They're doing it from the inside. Now, the only fortunate thing about Marxism is that it will self-implode, because its ideologies cannot generate culture. So it'll become fascist, which it is already. And then we have to worry about how are they going to substitute for that, what we call religiosity. Now, technology is an interesting thing. Another reason I went to Burning Man was to see, is it possible for a technological culture to emerge? And that's a whole interesting, fascinating subject that I also went to Burning Man. That was a kind of a subtopic. First of all, to see how the ecstatic experience was at the center. People at Burning Man today say that the heart of Burning Man is the temple. It's very moving. If you go to Burning Man, it's the most moving thing you'll do. When you go to the temple, I can't describe it. You'll feel it.
Yeah, but in my experience, I was there the year before the temple appeared. And I will tell you that the environment is absolutely moving. The Black Rock Desert is a crazy ass place. It's alien, daunting. It can kill you if you don't drink water, which is why they have their little staff going around telling people to drink and warning them about the signs of dehydration. It makes a beautiful canvas upon which particularly sculptural installations appear. But I have to just tell you honestly, I didn't find anything about, I didn't find anything about Burning Man moving that wasn't natural. I mean, other than a big fire.
To me, the temples were. The temples were
right. But remember, they only appeared the next year.
Right.
I didn't see it.
And a few other things, but again, the other aspect is the self-organization. The enthusiasm that these people have is almost kind of crazy, but it was the same enthusiasm I witnessed at the Rocio. I remember getting in the carreta of the Caballero family for the first time. And seeing this family, they're going to the Rocio, right? A religious thing. And, I didn't know what to expect. And they start singing, they start dancing right there in the carreta with each other. And it was almost a little embarrassing. I felt like I was eavesdropping on them, because these people were happy. And I called it the joyous procession. And you go to Burning Man, and you will see that there's a contagious kind of exhilaration there. However bizarre and trivial you might find it at times, nonetheless. And what does that turn to? Well, look at the organization and the productivity that place generates. It's amazing.
Could you give us some examples of that?
Yeah. Let's just look at one of my favorite groups, the Lamplighters. The Lamplighters get up every single morning. They have teams. They do these parties so people will come and volunteer. They're located right behind center camp. They have this array of kerosene lamps, hundreds of them. They have to clean them, boom, light them up, put in the kerosene. Then they have these these things that somebody designed, these robes. They have this technique of holding the sticks. It's something I could put a video up, but you guys can see it. I did some really interesting things, I think, with this. They're walking with them, and they go down. There's if you look at Burning Man, there's this large semicircle. It'd be nice to put that up there if we get around to it. And there's the temple, there's the Burning Man, and there's the temple behind it. And it's lined with these wooden posts that have, I think, four radios. And they go in there and they have this technique of lifting the lamp off the rod that the one guy is carrying in the middle and hitching it up to the post. And it's all done like clockwork. And it's something that they just evolved over time so they can get the whole road done. And then they get the whole periphery done. And then they started doing even some of the side streets. They're all.
So I could see immediately two things, because we had a question from I think it was Michael Stoddard again earlier saying, yeah, but culture isn't generated spontaneously in a short period of time. Well, see here to answer that, that's quite true. But the thing is that you can.
But without the ecstatic,
we'll get to that in just a second. The one thing that I want to address about that is, it's not some black and white thing of go back in time and attempt to impose a pastiche that has no sort of living, beating heart, right? You've got some stuffed scarecrow of a culture that you've sort of dressed up like something from the past, but it's not alive. It's not just that on one hand, and on the other side, some quick, spontaneous something. So take the example of the Lamplighters that you just gave, right? Look at the actual things that are tied to the environment that are real and appear in all times and all places. One is the transition from daylight to darkness. That's marking a transition. I mean, we used to have things like, think about prayer 5 times a day among Muslims, or think about the fact that we used to have Vespers as one of the cycles of prayer in the West.
The people walking through town, ringing the bell, giving the time, especially at night.
And marking a transition from the day state to the evening state. There's also the idea of, look at what a big deal it was once upon a time in order to like when we first developed the idea of public lighting in city streets. I mean, it absolutely transformed London and increased the safety, right? And you had the idea of gas lanterns that were set up around the city and how it became this remarkable thing. Before that, where you did have lighting, you had lamplighters. And they would go around and actually climb up and light the lamps. Yeah. And that marked the transition. But again, we're talking about the ability to create the social space and the ability to bring people together in what is basically a temporary city. It really is a temporary city.
That's what it is. It's a temporary city. You can even order a pizza from the town 3 hours away.
And when it's done, it's gone. There's not even a gum wrapper left on the ground.
That's the whole idea. No trace left behind.
But
was not a rule in the beginning.
And it developed over time. But what I'm trying to get at with the guy Stoddard, who's saying that, well, it doesn't just appear really quickly. Of course it doesn't. The thing is that you can have a new injection of the sense of an ecstatic experience, of a ritual beating heart of it, or whatever that aspect is that invivifies, but it will invivify naturally existing structures like human beings marking the transition from daylight to darkness.
Well, I like this. Because let me tell you, the proliferation now of the Burning Man regionals is extremely interesting. And for my model of culture, with the proliferation of ritual and ritual systems, Now I wanted to go. There's a Burning Man called Nowhere Man in Spain. And here in South Carolina, there is a miniature Rocio done by Spanish expatriates, which I've gone to a number of times. The Burning Man in its 35 years has now spread to many parts of the world. It's crazy. And the ethos has gone with it. A lot of interesting things, a lot of things I don't care for, but whatever. And I've gone to a number of regionals. Right? In a short span of 35 years, they've done pretty damn well. And it's proliferated. The Burning Man regionals you can go to a map there on the site and you'll see all the Burning Man regionals. Now they have an official where you go, I think it's Thursday night. A certain number of the regionals will bring their own effigies. They all get burnt at the same time on Thursday night. So really it's actually done when you have that catalyst of people pursuing something they're ecstatic about, and some of them having ecstatic experiences, but to different levels. And where that's in the center of it, it's amazing how fast it does happen.
Right. And I'm taking a look at like cultural things that developed. Like, you remember when I first started getting into flamenco, I wanted to look into the deep history or whatever. But you find out that really the core aspects of it, they really just appeared over like 100, 200 year period. It was fairly quick because you had to have the introduction of the guitar to allow some of this stuff to happen. Of course, there were earlier vocal forms and there was modal stuff, and like I can't get into it because I don't have the knowledge of music.
Part of my trip to Spain was I was convinced by listening to it that it had a sacred core to it. And there's two cores. One of them is the Spanish Christian, and the other one you see in the Devla, we can talk about some other time, to the goddess, which is Gypsy.
Right. Now, take a look at blues or jazz in the United States. How long have those things been around? And can you say that that they generate culture? Now, a bunch of people, I believe they generate culture and experience.
Tons.
Yeah.
Blues culture, tons.
Absolutely. And those come out of a religious culture.
Art that generates culture. You can see what people are into musically by looking at how they're dressed. It's really hysterical.
So you can come in. But take a look at something like jazz. Like everybody's like, well, that's the African-American contribution. And actually the African-American contribution, while there, is not quite as big as they think it is. They're like, oh, well, they brought in tap dancing. I'm like, no, they didn't. Look at Irish jigs and look at the footwork, right? And how that rolls over into tap, or look at buck dancing, right? So what I'm trying to do again is to answer the remark earlier.
Syncretic. It's really syncretic.
It's syncretic, and those elements already existed. So you're not creating stuff ex nihilo overnight.
There's a wonderful video done by Wynton Marsalis about the history of jazz, and he roots it back to, believe it or not, the Philip Sousa marching bands and the New Orleans processions and the marching band. That's a whole discussion we could do,
right?
But that's how much it's a total Western African
synthesis that happens. But I would say that the primary elements are more Western. But we don't have to have that argument. I mean, there are ways in which
blues, it's almost all black. Old blues it's just black. And to me, I think that a lot of hip hop originally, that's a whole interesting discussion. But
my point here, my point here is that, first off, none of this is appearing out of nothing. So you can say you can't generate culture just instantly overnight. Sure, you can. But the fact is that they're making it with pieces. Like if you build a new city in the desert where there used to be a Roman city and it's in ruins, they'll go and they'll take bricks and blocks and cut stone out of the ruined structures to build their new houses.
We're not new culture. We're saying what is the fastest way to catalyze culture, to catalyze people and to have a strong sense of self and community. Well, if you look at this crazy bunch of hippies out there, the sense of community and self is intense.
Yes, and there is one.
And it's proliferated all over the world.
And you had a different experience there than I did, because you went and you were, like you said, you're with the Lamplighters, so you were with the crew of people who'd been there longer. Now, I went in '99, which was, I guess now it was fairly early, but back then when I was there, everyone was like, it's '99, you aren't one of the original people. This used to be much smaller, and I was on the periphery. So I didn't get that experience of being there with the people who'd been originally there. So you can already see social stratification happening, even in 1999, between the original settlers and pioneers and innovators.
There are lots of fighting, lots of infighting in the beginning. The whole story there. One guy went and ended up in jail. He set the man on fire on his own before it was supposed to in protest. Because the whole struggle is self and organization. When you have self-organization, self and authority, this came into being right away. EDM was not liked by the punks, and the punks almost drove them out. They had confrontations over that. But I'm saying it's still a fascinating petri dish to just look at how people will generate culture quite rapidly, and what's the motivating factor? Why are they doing this? They're volunteer. It's volunteerism. Remember de Tocqueville, when he came to the United States in the 1830s, he said one of the most amazing thing about Americans, they volunteer for everything. Well, it's frontier culture. You have to. And so this volunteerism is exactly what is rampant in almost nobody is paid to do anything. On the contrary, you pay to go there, and then you pay to bring yourself there, to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. This, like the Lamplighters, is totally self-organized, and it's damn sophisticated. It's impressive. Again, you don't have to like them or like anything about the Burning Man, but to just see what motivates people to self-generate culture spontaneously and to do it in a powerful manner, it's a great thing to study.
Well, you're going to give us some more examples of that. I'm going to insert a parentheses where everybody's giving me a hard time saying it's not the Irish. They showed up later. You know, you have to look at the Scots and you have to look at reels and the rest. And I would add, yes, you can also talk about the Welsh and clogging with their wooden clogs. So yes, I get it. It's not just the one thing. My point is that there's a strong Western tradition that got imported from the British Isles and possibly from Spain as well, where you have the idea of rhythmic marking of time with your feet as a part of the dance. And that contributed to the idea of tap dancing. And it's not
was a big impression on the Black community. They loved it.
And tap dancing didn't come from African Americans.
No. And then you look at jazz, and you'll see another part of jazz is see what I was going to say. There's a guy named Europe. It'll come to me a middle. It's almost like two last names. His last name is Europe. And he was the Hellfires. The Hellcats was a black company regiment that went to France in World War I, and they had a marching band. And Europe, West Europe, it's going to come to me in a second. And when they first started marching, they would swing. What you did is you swing a march. That was the black contribution to it. And by swinging it, when they first got to France, and the French first heard them playing, they did this thing. They did the Marseillaise, and they did it in a way that at first the French didn't even get what it was, and then when they did, they were like, "Oh, damn!" And there was a sergeant, black sergeant, that said, "Wow, the impression that this music made on these people." He says, "This will be the music of the world."
Yeah,
and he's right. Jazz spread to the entire world. But
I hate putting a swing on a beat.
I do too. I don't like jazz, not at all.
I don't like ass wagging.
It completely melts out the emotional. But that's a whole nother subject we talk about. That's why jazz was so intellectual that it just lost it.
Noodle.
Yeah, noodling, especially when you get to fusion. That's just the nadir of Western and Black civilization. That music is so awful. Anyway, that's
Tell us how you really feel. Okay, bring us back around to Burning Man and Lessons for the Right on it. We have now, just to let you know, we have roughly 45 minutes left. So I'm now going to shut up and really give you the floor so you can get these.
Well, see, I don't know if there's a lesson. What I'm saying is that without the spiritual element, and I know people say, "Oh, religion, I hate religion." It doesn't matter if you hate religion. It's irrelevant. The spiritual component of humanity is so powerful that you will never generate a culture without it. And you may as well get used to that idea. So
just look at the damn Marxists trying to create a flattened secular religion as a sort of beating heart.
They can't. That's why they always transition to fascism if they survive. They have to. So for the West, what does it mean? It means that in some way or another, no matter where you are, if you want to go to paganism, a new religion, whatever, you must go into the forest and discover yourself and bring a community of people to regenerate why you're here, who you are.
Even the Christ had to go off into the desert.
They did desert, do the forest, do the jungle, do it in your room, whatever. But without this ecstatic experience at the core, you will not generate culture. Now, for that, I can't tell the people of the right, what to do or anything. I'm just saying, if you don't do that, you will not have a culture. So somebody else will. If you want the evangelicals to be the new America, well, step aside and let them dominate the entire spiritual side of American life or Western civilization, and that's what you're going to get.
And they have historically done that for
They've
periods.
done well. The whole movement of the Great Awakenings is pretty damn impressive. You look at the Amish; people aren't aware that the Amish are, and they don't. There's no proselytizing. The Mormons are all over the world. They're millions. I think I looked at 16 million. Something. The Amish are about 300,000, right under the nose of the rest of society. No electricity, very little involvement, and yet there they are, and they have this interesting ritual. When you get to puberty, the rite of puberty is the father brings out a case where it's got everything. It's got alcohol, it's got pornography or whatever. He says, "Have at it, kid." And
yeah, are you talking kind of like the Rumpspringer or whatever, that dam where they send them off and they can leave the community?
Right, before that, then they send them off. And they tell them, you don't have to come back, or you can come back to tell us you don't want to stay. And it's fine. It's up to you. And it's amazing, the retention. They go out, they see the world, what we think is so cool and all, and they go, okay, that's nice, but
Or take a look at as I seem to recall, and I think this is something that you're currently looking at. I'm looking forward to your clips on it. Everybody subscribe to his channel if you can follow this stuff and are interested. Go follow JollyScholar888, all one, no spaces in between. JollyScholar888. His channel is here on YouTube. But I believe you're looking at. Didn't the Quakers play a considerable role in the emergence of socialism in the U.S.?
Early, now the 60s. This would be a great conversation. I don't know if we can go into it.
Yeah.
Right? In the second, third Great Awakening, you started seeing a kind of communism that is not the communism of Marx. If you look at Fourier, that's why I brought him up, Charles Fourier. Fourierism is very interesting because I can give you a quote. That's where I got the Hakim Bey's comment on him. Again, he's an unsavory character in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I met him. I met him personally in New York. Yeah,
no
had some
kidding.
talks with him. Yeah.
All right, so let me just get this. Okay, it's called Work and Liberated Passions. So here it is. In Fourier's system of harmony, all creative activity, including industry, craft, and agriculture, etc., will arise from liberated passion. This is the famous theory of attractive labor. Fourier sexualizes work itself, the life of the phalanstery, which is an interesting way that he formulated the building of these communities, in a continual orgy of intense feeling, intellection, and activity, a society of lovers and wild enthusiasts. This is another form of, it's not Marxism, but that word gets used, of communism. And it's actually much closer to what I'm talking about. I may not have agreed with some of the things that he was talking about with the economics, but nonetheless, a fascinating person. And what they're talking about, without the ecstatic, you have to love what you're doing, and you go at it with this kind of lust. And basically, because it's your inner nature, and you will create. And that's one of the things that you have. I look at Burning Man and say, well, damn, they did a good job with this. It's, again, almost eroticizing labor. And one of the things that I discovered when I was going to another Burning Man regional that I wrote the beginnings of a paper in it, was that class distinctions arise naturally from the creative process. As people find what they want to do and then scurry about saying, oh, I can do this. Well, I can do that. I'm going to do this. This is the part I want to contribute to. And then it's amazing that it'll differentiate into what we call classes, or just division of labor.
Or lamplighters, to your earlier example.
Exactly.
Let me just quickly plug this in. Yes, Hakim Bey is a card-carrying NAMBLA member. That's why Gerard at the outset said an unsavory character. And I will also explicitly say I do not endorse any of that aspect of him. He simply was interesting as a social theorist who basically survived from the 60s. And he's also something of a true scholar. I do not even begin to endorse. It's like Foucault. I don't endorse Foucault either. The
autonomous zone thing was he came up with it. I've got the book here somewhere, little pamphlet I just ordered. And it's just a copy of, it's an updated centuries later version of Nietzsche's Into the Forest. You go into the forest to encounter what he's called the paradox that lies at the heart of existence. All right, these autonomous zones, if you're sitting around just being autonomous for no reason, you see what happens with a chop. Just imbeciles. They're shooting each other, killing each other in no time at all. Yet you go to the Burning Man, there's 70,000 people now. The level of, and everybody's, half of them are intoxicated. And to see any kind of violence and stuff is rare. The same thing, though, is homogeneity has a lot to do with it, because people said the same thing about the Indianapolis 500. There was 100,000 people there drinking beer and everything. Then you go to Rocio, which was up to 150,000 people. And I never saw an act of violence.
It's weird.
Anybody.
It's almost as though
they're drinking all the time.
It's almost as though it's like the lack of diversity is their strength. Strange that.
You've got to come
so
to that.
Baffling.
Well, I was in Japan many years ago, walking down by myself. I'm 6'3" and I had long hair and a beard. I stuck, it's not like anybody didn't notice me. Nothing. There was no feeling of threat, no feeling of danger at all. And I'd never been there before in my life.
Yeah, and it's a civilized place. Japan is quite civilized.
Homogeneity is a strength. It's not a weakness. Diversity is a fucking ridiculous notion, like multiculturalism. You cannot have, it's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Culture is how people see themselves as human beings. It's their values and how they understand themselves as human. You have 2 or 3 cultures in the same place where people see their fundamental humanity in different ways. You're just asking for it. All I got to do is look at the Middle East.
Yeah.
It'll never end. And we can use Spain as an example. 800 years the Muslims occupied, Andalusia was finally driven out. 800 years, they were Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And these apologists from the left, these Marxist imbeciles, they invented a word called convivencia, that they all lived and got along under Muslim rule. No, they never got along. Never. The Jews were massacred twice in Granada on 2 separate occasions. The Christians went after them in Sevilla once. The Muslims and the Christians were fighting it out continuously. Like the guy with the funny mustache said, that peace is just the lull between wars. Okay, there were times where they weren't fighting because they had to recoup.
Right.
And the steady reconquest of Spain was driven by the feeling that they were a people, they were united, and this was their land, and they put a virgin every time they advanced. The Rocio is one of those. The Villa de la Cabeza was another.
And plus, Spain is just, even to this day, is a fiction as a nation because of the strong regional identities. They have fault line. Look at what's going on with Catalonia. Look at Galicia.
America is one nation with many states. Spain is one state with many nations.
Right. And I agree. Yeah. So the diversity angle is just absurd. But let's come around. We have a little, just over a half an hour left. One of the questions I want to ask you is, I imagined in my mind, like, what would happen if there was, I mean, it's an interesting intellectual exercise for me anyway. If you were to imagine a right-wing Burning Man, like, who would be there? Like, I'm thinking to myself, well, here's the trad Cath group, right? The traditional Catholics show up. Okay. And then there's some ethno-nats, over here with some, gigantic effigy of Wotan or something. It's kind of amusing in your mind to imagine.
I used to imagine this big thing with, I told you about it, right? This is before I even knew about Burning Man. This big laughing effigy. You would have, the blonde hair would be made out of gold. And for my guess, I mean, it would have a huge phallus that was down. And then at a certain time of year and day, the phallus would come up and he would start laughing uproariously. And this would be like the zenith of the celebration.
Right. Well, now let's go. Let's go around. We all have our artistic contributions.
Laughing with an erection,
right?
Life, yes. So, I remember that they used to tell me at the Rocio that there was this prayer, and I didn't realize that when they say this is they would go through the vivas. Viva just means life. Every time they stop, they go viva la corretero, viva this, viva that, viva, and you realize what a great thing that is. It's saying life is good.
Right. Rather than this antinomian, pessimist, Gnostic, Marxist, dialectical materialism, this garbage, this utopian nihilism.
We have the same amount of beans.
We all have the same amount of beans.
They got more money than we do. They got more land. They got more this.
Yeah, it's simultaneous. It's simultaneously nihilistic and utopian, which, go figure. The contradictions are so absurd that at this point, even trying to register them
is a facade. I'm going to do a thing on the true nature of Karl Marx. That was a facade from the beginning. From the beginning. He was a fascist from day one. He never intended utopia.
That's
how you sold it. That's how you sell it.
there are going to be a whole bunch of fascists who are like pissed off at you because of the constant, parallels. But let's come at it this way.
Good in the sense that one people, one ethnicity,
one nation,
state, one nation,
and one culture.
One culture.
I don't happen to dig black wool uniforms or top-down impositions. That's just my character. But let's come around to this idea of a right-wing Burning Man, though, because like the first thing, as soon as I got through the phase of saying, well, the trad caps would be over here, and the FNATs and the ANCAPs would be over here, or at least the right-wing ones. I immediately just thought, no, that's not what would happen. And I actually saw a comment about this earlier, that it would be, subverted before it even gets off the ground. The reality is that if there were a right-wing Burning Man, 50% of the people paying the entrance fee to participate would be FBI. But so this brings me around. What did you see about subversion and tension between the left, commie left trying to subvert Burning Man? What kind of things have they been dealing with?
Fucking universities. Where else? There's a thing called the Galactic, I forget, Galactic something, and it was a very cool little theme camp. It had this big Moroccan tent, huge. It would fit 50 people in it, more. And there was a bar in it. And when you walked in there, the Moroccan tent is so excellent at, they had the rugs on the floor, that the difference in temperature was amazing. There's no air conditioning. You just walked in it.
Yeah.
And there they were talking, and these are mostly intellectuals, they're people universities. And suddenly people are getting up to speak, and this girl gets up there. Oh man, she just reeked. She starts going on about, well, this was the Burning Man of the past. Now that we're now that we're millennial in this, how would we reimagine Burning Man? What about this man? Is it a Burning Man? Everybody's going, that's the word we use. Who gives a fuck? But okay. So then she started going on and on, step by step, and you could tell exactly where this is going, right? How are we going to turn this into social activism? That's where she was going. And to the burners' credit, they didn't, I think a lot of them saw through it going, we're really not here for that. We hear you. That's nice. But we're really not here for that. She didn't really, I was very pleased to see that she didn't get a great reception. However, that was quite a while ago. That could be changing. I'm already seeing it on the website. Now they have to at least give lip service to that, right? They've got to at least, how pervasive is it? I'll give you an example where it is not. I got in a big argument with a guy on the DC Burner site. He was already starting with his, his white privilege, the pronouns and assumptions of this. And it was like, I let him have it. We went at it.
Be careful. Don't use negative slurs for women. I'm going to have to go out and cut out how you called a person a female dog, because we're on YouTube. Sorry. You did. You called used the term for a female dog. So I'm going to have to. So
I didn't like her.
I know, but they'll just come in and be evil female dogs and destroy my channel. But go on.
For a neutral nasty dog, right?
Yeah.
The bitch you have to do.
Right.
So anyways, a nasty creature. Mm. So a few guys, though, I noticed came always behind the scenes and said, man, thanks for saying that. I'm glad you said that. And then there's this girl, young, very attractive. She has like a little site. It says, don't stop canceling me. # stop canceling me. And she just lets him have it. She's just right up front, and she's a burner. And so it shows you that spirit of the original Burning Man is still there. But will it get overrun by the social justice fascists? I don't know. I'd have to go back and get a feel for it. From the website, it's happening slowly, but it's happening. But there's resistance to it. And I think I remember I told you that they do a census there all the time, and people voluntarily fill them out. I was shocked that there were 16% who actually admitted, at least on paper, that they were Republicans at Burning Man. 16%. I was going, damn, I wouldn't have thought that.
Like I remember the one time I went, maybe they didn't have it when you were there, but there was essentially like a coffee tent, where a big ass tent in the center where you could go and like get your latte, because all these people from the West Coast,
the center cap, right? It's everything you can buy. You can buy coffee at the coffee bar, and
Right.
ice.
Right. And
Otherwise, no money, no economy.
that's that West Coast thing. But while I was sitting there,
I was glad.
because I had come from the East Coast, now I lived in San Francisco briefly, but this is many years after I'd moved away from there. And I had gone out to Burning Man, and I'm sitting there in the center having my coffee. And this dude comes rolling in that I had first met in Turkey, who lived in San Francisco. I'm just like, this whole place, half of this.
Isn't that wild? I met a Persian musician that came all the way from Iran.
Half of Burning Man literally comes from San Francisco, like a full half of it. So it has a heavy influence from that.
The West Coast, yeah, just logistics, but it's a huge proportion of the dome. But yeah, you're right. It's probably a majority.
So it's to the extent that the West Coast has become like less old left and this new horror show, it's probably been subverted further. And it's kind of ugly. But let's come back to this idea of like subversion. Have you seen anything other than that? I mean, I remember 99 and 2000. I think that was a period where you started to have more law enforcement coming in undercover and busting people for drugs and stuff. But they didn't have any kind of political concern with it, because I never saw Burning Man expressing itself strictly as political. Maybe meta-political, but never really political.
Harvey was very adamant that he's not anti-capitalism. He was anti-commodification, not anti-capitalism. He was never anti-capitalism, and it's pretty obvious he had no sympathy. He seemed to have no sympathy for the left, for any kind of Marxism. He's died. He died, and I don't know. We'll have to see what happens. If the Marxists take the place over, as far as I'm concerned, it'll implode rather quickly. It'll be intolerable. It'll be like a gulag.
Right.
Once they start enforcing shit like that, I'm thinking it might be impossible, though. There might be just enough craziness and wildness in those people still that they'll never get it through. Judging from the websites, the most specific. Oh, but the guy that I had that ousting thing with, that big confrontation with, he actually he says he had to leave certain boards that he was a member of. That he left them, he says. My guess is they probably asked him to. But he's still prominent, though. He's a prominent guy in there, and so I don't know.
And they're
anti-white. That's one of his definitions. He's fighting whiteness. Right there on the Burning Man site.
I think one of the things that, and that's like what 99% of the people who go there. Yeah,
exactly. Going, why aren't there more? Oh, let me give you. I used to teach this in my music, American popular music course. I would get to Burning Man. And my students were 80% black, maybe 75, depending sometimes. And there was a Hispanic contingency, and then like a 5% white. And I would do Burning Man as part of, starting all the way from Back of the Blues, we do Burning Man. And there was always a certain number of black kids, males and females, that said, wow, that is cool. I love that. Can we go? I mean, like, next time you go, you take us with you. And then there was about an 80% of them that was like, what the fuck is that? So when they say, why aren't there more black people in Burning Man? Well, I can tell you why. They don't want to go, stupid. It's not racism. It's not this. They're not interested. What makes you so vain that because you like it, you burners are thrilled with it, that therefore everybody else is? And you fetishize black people, so of course you think you know them, you understand them. Well, I can tell you that from giving my courses, the majority of the black kids looked at it and go, what the hell is that?
It's not
but there was a small group that said, oh man, I love that. And if you go to Burning Man, there's a small number of black people. Probably, I would say, proportionate, maybe even a little bit less, because by the time you get to logistics, but a proportion of black people at Burning Man, somewhat close, maybe a little bit less than the proportion of my classes, of how many black people thought Burning Man was anything but a bunch of ridiculous hippies and they didn't want anything to do with it.
Okay. Well, then let's take a look at Burning Man as something that they, how do I put this? There is a clip that I'm going to be doing, I hope fairly soon, where I'm going to be talking to a number of programmers about how programmers think in terms of systems. Really, there's an interesting thing going on. I think you can draw a line between structuralism in general and systems thinking and programmers.
Structuralism, yes.
Right. systems thinking that programmers would have to adopt in order to tackle the problems they're confronted with is essentially a kind of the nature of the scripts and texts that this new class of scribe has to grapple with in order to perform its function means that they're really kind of a new scribal class. And we have seen with like Mencius Moldbug, Curtis Yarvin, neo-reactionary stuff that, and I only learned this as people who are involved in that sort of, turned me onto it and explained it to me, that there's just a huge contingent of white programmers who are involved in all of this, and they're into systems thinking. To me, they strike me as kind of a new scribal class. And what's interesting is that the Marxists, the bean counters, they come out of textual traditions. They come out of the idea of religions of the book, the red column and the black column, the idea of a textual archetype for culture rather than something more spontaneous like a musical tradition. Like take a look at the Greeks. They have secular texts.
All Marxism is language. Their weapon is language and language based.
Right. But look at what we have. We have a very interesting thing, which is programmers who form a scribal class.
Yes.
They were overlooked for a considerable period of time by the leftists. And you see this neo-reactionary thing start as like sort of a minority thing among white programmers who apply systems thinking.
And they've all been working there under their noses. And they
right.
thought for sure that they were like us.
Right. And that's so I bring that up because, people who are interested look for that. It's going to be coming on the horizon. It's going to be a part of the strategy series. I think
absolutely it has to be a strategy. We must get the programmers more and more on our side. And I think that's a natural tendency for them. But math, these people believe in math.
Right. But
that makes a distinction between them and the structuralists.
Right. Because it's writing without the arbitrariness of language, because in math, you can lie, but you'll eventually be caught. In language, you can arbitrarily play games a la Saussure, saying
definitely
right. The arbitrary signifier. Let's call it, colored people, the people of color, the black to Negro.
You can't do that in nonsense.
Right.
Program won't work.
So I bring that up because we can see there clearly an example of a new scribal class, and that's where the Marxists would normally go to immediately seize upon them and subvert them and take them. But it somehow slipped under their noses because it's not a textual tradition.
They assumed there were, right?
We also saw that gamers for quite some time as a current of social normalization, right? You have the idea of gamers, they experience this stuff in game, right? And so the same sort of Marxists who would have come in and said, hey, we're going to control television, we're going to control advertising, we're going to control publishing, we're going to control newspapers, we're going to control Hollywood. Somehow gaming went under their radar for a little while, because it wasn't a metaphor they were typically were conversant with.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, basically a whole group of people, that Gamergate and everything else, they were like, fuck off, man, fuck you. They established their core before it could be subverted. And so they have some degree of resistance to the subversion that the Scrabble Babble rearrangers of letters typically like to employ. So I bring this up because we've got the example of Gamergate, we've got the example of programming. I think Burning Man went under their radar for a considerable period of time too, as something that they didn't need to directly try to engage with and subvert.
I think they couldn't. I think that the leaders of Burning Man, Harvey and them, I think they resisted them because it was on their radar. Hell yes, it was. They wanted to appropriate that so bad, and when they couldn't, they started maligning it. I think that it was resisted, but with that generation going
dying, yeah, they're not going to be able to resist any longer. And you could talk about resisting every single thing that they go after. They have thus far been able to, solve it, coagulate. They've been able to dissolve it,
yes.
Given enough time. But I mean, do you see anything in this phenomena with regional burns or the rest? Do you see anything where there's this spontaneous generation of culture and it shows a resistance? Has it produced anything of value? Because I'll just tell you honestly, I went to Burning Man and I was just like, meh. You get tired of standing outside of porta potties. You have, dickweeds spinning, glow sticks on the end of strings. Everybody's screwed up on drugs.
You didn't see the work of the Lotus Girls? Oh man, it's fantastic.
The Lotus Girls.
They build these big mechanical things. They're all welders, and this fantastic sculptures that go on fire and stuff. And
I told you the sculptural art aspect of it is the most impressive part. But still culturally, I did not see Burning Man producing any culture of value. I could see where you would be interested to see how it spontaneously develops in the rest, but like I didn't carry anything away from it saying, wow, that's something, you know, could be
As a
used.
study of humanity, it was great. Do I like what, you know, yeah, values, but I think to get to your point, you know, moving towards the techno-anarchism, my model of techno-anarchism is where I'm going. So if you say that on the right, I'm glad that you brought up the programmers and stuff. One of the most interesting things we could do is a kind of festival that is, you must get there on your own, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, where everything is about programming, but at a sophisticated experiential level, gaming at a new level, holograms, something that people will start seeing the future in this very positive, almost like the ecstatic experience. You just love what you're doing there.
Well, I could,
people resist this Marxist indoctrination. I think that's one of the best things that we can move towards, is into technology and creating a technology that is, it doesn't even have to be right. It just has to be not fascist left. That's all it has to be.
Well, let me add there's another opportunity that lies in the art of memory, which is the idea of the externalization of internal structures. So the idea, according to this line of thinking, the cathedrals were first built in the trained memories of monks in monastic and mystical traditions. And then a certain point came where the temple would be externalized so that lay people without trained memories could walk through a structure similar to the one in the memories of the trained religious. Now, when you talk about things,
symbols, they could read all the symbols in those stained glasses.
Or coming through a particular door that's open, like when I went to Compostela, there was a door that was only opened every 11 years for pilgrims. And it has certain iconography associated with it as you pass in that metaphorically references all these spiritual structures. What I'm getting at is that virtual reality gives you an opportunity to externalize and render experienceable sort of interior psychological architectures that correspond to knowledge in certain ways. I don't want to go way off down that.
I think this is where we have our at least one point on what I'm calling the bolt of techno-anarchism resistance to become non-oppressible. The idea is, we don't really care what the assholes are doing if they can't affect us. And the idea of revolution, of trying to replace, I think the American Revolution was the only successful one. It created a kind of the closest thing to an anarchistic society, and it's already going way too authoritarian. But if we can create societies and communities that cannot be oppressed, and by that I mean the cost of the oppressor to oppress outweighs whatever they would gain, and if we can interlock these communities throughout the nation that will functional. And so what does it take to create a functional, what I call a bolt? That's something you can learn from Burning Man, because they are. That's my word for it. I'm sure that.
What do you mean, like a bolt hole?
A bolt is, I use it, the bolt of chaos. That there are points of there are points that you have to establish to make the interior non-oppressible. The idea of going out in revolution, I think those days are over. The days of going out in the streets, the monkeys that you see in the black pajamas in Portland, it's a kabuki theater. They're being paid to do that. They're not fighting
the whole idea that anything grassroots can, that's a very common idea.
Yeah, but that's not grassroots.
Sure.
That's the Democratic Party staging a kabuki theater.
And in any case, the people who ultimately took over, I mean, think about a bunch of these Frankfurt guys sitting there together at a table, and they're like, or you got like a Gramsci type figure, and he's like, oh my God, we've never been successful in terms of revolution. So what is it we need to do? And they're like, wait a minute, I know. We'll redefine the meaning of all their words. That I'm not, there's far more going on. I'm caricaturizing it.
I used to call it gut attack, gut. Take the shell of the institution, like if it's English department, and gut it.
Right. Well, that's the idea of pseudographia, where you have a message that you want to get in.
This is Gramsci's entire thing of escaping now. What's the word they'd even use? It's cultural hegemony. That the reason the resistance to communism was cultural hegemony.
Right, and that he had to find a way to destroy the culture.
And then idiots thought they're going to replace it with ideology, and you would still have a functioning society, which you will not. And they'll find out. So I think the whole idea of revolution in the streets is romantic, and I love it. We want to go out there, just like the Viking thing. We want to go out and plunder and pillage. Hell yes, it's an instinct. But can we create societies, communities that become non-oppressible? through cryptocurrency, through I'm identifying the different.
Yeah, you just sound like a typical. You sound like a typical ANCAP guy. Tech is going to save us. You know, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency will help us. Elon Musk.
Not by itself. But if you have at the core what we're calling, and this would be a kind of, I don't want to say a new religion, but a spirit, something that connects us with the divine, with the totality. When you start to say these things, you sound hokey, right?
But now let me say to
technology people, can be a tool to create non-oppressibility.
But to be fair to you, for an audience, you know, I've known you for decades now, and you're a dear old friend of mine. So let me just say that this isn't the only angle that Gerard is coming at this from. I mean, you're telling me now that you're going to be going further into some of your series, taking a look at the idea of going out into the forest. You actually have one clip already posted on that. The idea of religious revivals, the idea of everyone
how they function in moving the American experience to where it is. That they were essential and they were powerful.
Right. And so what I'm trying to hammer on here, though, I'm trying to hammer on here for our viewers who know less about or nothing about your research. It's not just the Rocio pilgrimages, which is traditional Catholic lay brotherhoods. It's not just Burning Man. It's not just Burning Man out in the desert.
Right.
It's not just religious revivals in the United States in a series of cycles. You've got a consistent theme that you're exploring. And it is the idea of the generation of culture through the ecstatic experience with a particular focus upon music and its role.
And technology now.
Right.
By techno-anarchism is how can we create communities using the principle of non-oppressibility rather than trying to revolt and change the power structure. I think those days are gone. Romantic Revolution was wonderful. You know, the big picture that I love of Delacroix, the woman with her breasts hanging out and the French flag, the guy with his gun. It's glorious, and we all love it.
Yeah, I don't. The idea of the French Revolution makes me want to barf.
Whatever, because of the results, yeah. But the idea
this minor thing, this minor little detail of the results.
It's just but it was beautiful. It was romantic, you know, and we were susceptible to that.
No, that's how the propagandist expressed it. I mean, you think that the tumbrils and the aristocrats having their heads cut off, and you know.
No, I'm talking about the painting of Lacroix. That's all.
Right, but let's skip the propagandist.
I'm saying that romantic idea of revolution, I think, is over. It's done. This revolution is not going to do anything anymore. Going out this, and so I'm going the opposite. Was non-oppressibility. We make it so expensive for anybody to oppress us that it's not worth it. And as we interlock with other bolts, we make it even more expensive. If they can't pay enough to make it worth their effort, then let them go play in their sandbox. Who cares? Right. The idea of placing, and this is what might happen in America. We don't know what's going to happen with the United States in this near future. The rise of a socialist fascist state is very possible.
The rise of, this is where I'd send out a tweet where I'd put in quote the rise of, and I put a little, you know, tears coming out its eyes, laughing face. It's already here. There's nothing as ridiculous as the right wing constantly saying alarmist things that involve the future tense. It's all already here.
All right.
It's all already here.
How do we resist it? It hasn't come to us personally yet, and it will.
Well, it could, it can certainly come much more personally. Yes.
Well, that's when you really know you're in the fascist state, is when you yourself must comply. And we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, my job is gone because of their machinations with this COVID nonsense. My channel's demonetized, so 5 years of investment in trying to have an alternative form of income has now been killed. I mean, so you can say it doesn't affect us personally. Try saying any one of these things at your job. Think about what it's done to your friendships.
Oh, yeah.
So you're right. So, I mean, you know, there is that, but there's something you pointed out. Yeah. The idea of gut, well, yeah, except I got a new circle of friends who'll be like, you voted? Right. So it's a totally different angle. But look at it like this. You got the idea of gutting, right? And this is something that's very, very interesting to me. That's why I brought up the thing of pseudographia, right? You know about the tradition of writing a text and attributing it to an author of great prestige who existed previously, right? So we've got lots of pseudo-Aristotle, right? We've got like the ad horennium, which is attributed to Cicero, but it wasn't, right? But there's also a specific thing as a strategy, which is to write your thing and then say that it was written by this revered figure earlier in order to have uptake. Right now, there's some people who will tell you that Dionysius the Areopagite really did exist, and that his books on ranks of angels and everything really were written by this early Christian figure. Other people will tell you that it was just attributed to him, right?
Or that he said it so that he would be like, even if people knew he's not that person,
he comes from his school, right? Or exactly. In some timeless eternal sense, he is one with that voice.
Yes.
But it is also a strategy. I was looking, the idea of taqiyya, right, among the Muslims, or permissible dissimulation, right? And certainly commies are known for it, of the most opportunistic and exploitative sort, right?
Of course, Western civilization and Islam are compatible. Of course they are. Yeah. So let a million of us in.
But the God, I hope people understand irony. But what I'm getting at is that taqiyya, I went and looked and I said, wait a minute, I don't think that's so much Muslim. I think that's Persian, right? Because you have the Shiites having to coexist with the Sunnis. You have the crazy Arabs coming out of the desert and overwhelming the Sassanid Empire. And the Persians historically had a very developed culture and society, and they're trying to survive in these circumstances, right? So I said, all right, let me look at taqiyya, and let me
say something about that you can pretend to be you pretend to go along with the kafirs until you can apply the Sharia. Didn't Mo actually say that?
There are aspects, yeah, because they wouldn't have seen it as being legal within Islamic canon law of its various stripes if they could not trace it back to some phrase that seemed to endorse it in the hadith, right? But here's the important thing: is I said taqiyya, the idea of permissible dissimulation. I've already talked about the idea of pseudographia, which sort of echoes this notion, right? Permissible dissimulation. Going back to your idea of gutting the thing and replacing its guts, keeping the signifier but changing what it signifies, right? So I went looking at
with an ideology.
Right. I went looking at the Persian aspect of it, and I said, wait a minute, look at the fucking Baha'is. The Baha'is are trying to be a global religion for everyone, but it's just the same old riff of a prophetic bloodline that runs with blood that you see with Shiism, that you see with Persianism, Persianate religious expressions, right? And the Baha'is, I went, oh man, the Baha'is, it's basically, they just basically stripped a bunch of Islamic accretions off of it, made it more Persian.
You get their impression right away, don't you?
And now they're just trying to make it be a global religion.
Right.
And so I went and I found this interesting scholar who had been looking into the idea of taqiyya, and she quite perceptively said, yeah, the best thing I could trace it back to was the Persian idea that you see with Cyrus, which is that he would conquer a nation. Remember, that's a fundamentally Indo-European idea. Persians are Indo-Europeans. And what they would do is when they conquered a people, you can't imagine Jews, for example, ever doing this, or proper Semitic Muslims, because the idea is, they don't talk in the Bible about what happened after the walls of Jericho fell, but they slaughtered every man, woman, and child.
Every man, woman, and child, and animal, so as not to be polluted. So as not to be polluted.
Right, but you have an Indo-European idea, which Cyrus did. He's like, we'll take over your country. We'll let you keep your gods. I'm just going to insert me, Cyrus, as one of them in your pantheon, right?
But the Roman, that's why the
sure, absolutely, it's an Indo-European thing. Don't screw. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Keep
don't mess with religion, because they know religion works.
And that it breaks out regionally and territorially for the people as a self-expression that binds them and is their function. So anyway, what I'm getting at is, if you have the idea of pseudographia, if you have the idea of taqiyya, if you have the idea of this Cyrus thing that we just talked about, and if we know that what the Marxists did is they came, because of this gap between the signifier and the signified, they basically cut off whatever the signifier signified and replaced what it signified, while the shell of it, the stalking horse on the outside remains the same.
No, you're not. You're a Marxist activist masquerading as an English teacher.
Right.
So everything that you're teaching is actually Marxism.
Right.
And this is not
math, not whatever.
Now it's even got to the math. They're doing it,
right?
Which is crazy. People thought they couldn't do that.
Well, now they're doing it at like war colleges.
It's not really for.
Right.
You're an imbecile. You're right.
But here's the thing. As a strategy, can we imagine the possibility of coming around from the other direction and saying, what if we take the signifier that corresponds to this signified and we re-gut it and put something like its original guts back in, think of the overwhelming unconscious sense of rightness that would return if the signifier and the signified once again corresponded. So, you know, there is the idea that there is a strategic opportunity inherent in the fact that in gutting this and using it as a stalking horse, its surface features still culturally in a deep sense correspond to something that could be put back into them. And
Right.
that's a very abstract thing.
That. I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that I'm very pissed off about the right and the resistance is when they talk, and I was kind of doing that, but not really. Again, Burning Man is an example of what we might be able to do by using certain things. It's an example of something, that's all. What I was very pissed off at, when Trump was blocked by Twitter, we ceded the territory. We said, oh, we'll make our own. No, man. To me, that was the only.
Never
we
cede
showed
territory
up at
willingly.
Twitter, 100,000 people, and ransacked through that building and said, you're going to do what?
Well, not ransacked. I'm not calling for
In
violence,
a nice
ladies and
way.
gentlemen.
In a nice way. You go there and beat drums and find the guys who are in the cubicles that do the censoring and let them know you know
Stop.
who they are. You know their names.
Stop. Just
they do it.
Stop endorsing on my channel, on your channel. Please feel free on your channel to endorse behaviors.
It's not
Civil,
violent.
right? We're
Civil
talking about
disobedience.
right. So, well, okay, fine.
But we should have done
with you.
civil disobedience. Instead, we left them alone.
We should have been lawful and civil and made our voices heard.
There you go. But right
Exactly.
in their building, 100,000 people in their building, letting our voices heard.
Out in front of their building in a public place. Gerard.
No, citizens do that to others. They go first to the Capitol building.
Right, but it has nothing. You have to understand.
Beat a drum.
Universalism and standards no longer apply. Yes, it's legal for them to do it illegally, but it's not legal for us to do it illegally. And so I enjoin you, all my listeners, do not break the law. Obey the law very carefully and closely. Know what's going on in your own states and nationally in terms of the law. Obey all laws.
Right.
My channel is not suggesting that
ceded the territory.
Make your voice heard.
Oh, we're going to do a parlor now.
Indeed.
No, our ancestors worked hard to create these institutions, and we cannot cede the territory to them, because eventually we'll have no place to run.
Sure. And that goes for publishing the rest. I'm not sure if I would call Jack Dorsey my ancestor, but I understand what you're talking about. Sure. Okay. Now we have just like literally like 2 minutes left. What I would like to do is allow you. I mean, sorry, it's not much time, but we're coming up on the 2 hour mark. What final words do you want to share with everybody before we wrap?
Well, since it's about Burning Man, the idea is to study how culture emerges and how people self-organize. And hate or love Burning Man, there's a few things they did really, really well. One of them was self-organize. So far, they are not completely, you would think, this being a San Franciscan thing, that they would just be totally down the drain of the Marxist degeneration. And actually, they're not quite there yet. I'm very surprised. There's still a lot of resistance in it. So part of that is because of, I believe, the temple, and I believe it's because people go there to connect with something far larger than a political ideology. It's what we're going to have to do. And self-organization by people who love what they're doing and therefore find their own place in it. They find their own place. You know, they look at something and go, oh, I can do this. And somebody goes, yeah, I could do that. Or I'll help you do this because I really like that too. All right. This kind of enthusiasm and energy is what will generate culture. And we have to create on the right a culture that is so attractive that we start pulling people out of the Marxist insanity.
Yeah, it's got to be the carrot in this respect is superior to the stick. It must beckon.
Yeah, and by making ourselves, and we can't cede culture anymore. We have to hold our ground in culture. We cannot cede it and think we're going to go off in some other corner, because sooner or later, no matter where we go, they will hunt us down.
Right. Well, I like the idea that is very often talked about of creating the elites, subverting the elites, bringing over the disaffected elites and the rest. But we're going to have to save that for another time. We are now 1 minute out from close. So I want to take this opportunity, Gerard, if I may, to shill your channel again. Anybody who's interested in my friend Gerard's ideas, you can find him at JollyScholar888. He's here on YouTube. I believe you're actually on Twitter as well. People can follow you there.
I'm not as active there as you know, but my main thing is YouTube, and then I have websites, and I'm starting to become more active in a number of other sites. But for right now, let's just leave it at YouTube. I'm developing like 4 others. I'm going to limit it to 4.
Okay.
And I've got a class series that I'm developing that if they're interested in music and humanity, I've got a few samples, free samples of the class. Eventually, I'll have the whole course.
Take a look over on Gerard's channel, and you can also find a previous discussion I had with him on processions. Now we're just seconds out, so thank you all for joining us today. We will be back sometime soon. Until then, I am Semigog, and I am out.